If you like to follow in your Bibles, you might turn to Titus, the first chapter. We'll be reading from there in just a few moments. Let me say again, it's been a joy to be here. I've had a good afternoon. I hope you have had a good afternoon. Had me a little bit of a nap, and that helps always. I believe in Sunday afternoon naps, and Monday afternoon and Tuesday afternoon. Literally. I think you reach an age when you can get by with that. Appreciate the elders inviting me to come. Appreciate Andrew and his work with you. All I've ever heard is good things. And he spoke for us back in the fall one night. Did a good job. And it is just exciting to me to see good young men, able young men, coming along. I've heard opposite ideas on the importance of elders. Years ago, I heard a man say of a place where he had lived in the past, he said, we lost our eldership, but we found out that we could do without elders just as good as we could with them. And I thought that was close to blasphemy. What a terrible statement. We could do as well without God's plan as we could with God's plan. And I've probably told you 100 times, Irvin Lee's comment. Brother Lee was one of the most quotable men that I ever was around. He said if a church owned a meeting house and a preacher's house and had them paid for and could swap them for a qualified eldership, they'd make a good swap. And that's kind of where I am. Churches need elders. And I'm glad that you're at the point of maybe looking out to see if there are others who can serve with the ones who presently serve. That's an indication of growth, spiritual growth within a group. That's good. But just anybody cannot serve as an elder. There are qualifications that are to be met. And while it's not the most interesting study in the world, it's one of the most important studies in the world. And so let's give our thoughts to the qualifications of elders tonight. We read a moment ago, 1 Timothy 3, 1 through 6. Let's read Titus 1 through 5 through several verses. For this reason I left you in Crete, that you should set in order the things that are lacking and appoint elders in every city as I commanded you. If a man is blameless, the husband of one wife, having faithful children, not accused of dissipation or insubordination. For a bishop must be blameless as a steward of God, not self-willed, not quick-tempered, not given to wine, not violent, not greedy for money, but hospitable, a lover of what is good, sober-minded, just, holy, self-controlled, holding fast the faithful word as he has been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and to convict those who contradict. Turn back to 1 Timothy chapter 3. I think we'll use that as our base, though we will obviously be making some references to those qualifications found in Titus. Several mistakes are made on occasions in regards to the qualifications of elders. One mistake is that I'm afraid there are people who just look at the family qualifications. And if a man has believing children, then he's qualified to be an elder. They never look and see if he might be quick-tempered. They may not even consider whether he is really able to teach. Brother so-and-so has believing children. I believe he'd make a good elder. Well, there's more to it than just having believing children. But so often, I get the impression that's just kind of the thing that the people look at first. And may I make this comment? A man might have believing children, But it may be that he's not really the one that exercised the influence that brought those children to be strong. He may have had very little effect on those children. His wife being the strong one, the one who has worked so carefully with the children. It may be that she's really the reason why he has believing children. So there's a lot to be considered beyond that. And then sometimes I think people just almost ignore the qualifications. When I was in college, I preached for a church that at one time had appointed 4 men to serve as elders. 3 of them were in their 20s, and one of them had been a Christian 6 months. As you would expect, that church had problems. Of course they did. And later, long after they had elders, and I'm preaching there, one of the men who had served said, "I wish we had never had elders." I said, "You didn't?" He said, "You're exactly right. Not one of us was qualified." They just ignored the qualifications. We have to consider all of the qualifications and consider, do men meet these qualifications? So let's look at them, study them, and I'm going to do this by placing them in various categories, which I hope will help us to kind of focus a little bit on this. First of all, there's an age consideration. They're elders. If I were to ask any of you, what is an elder? You would say an older man. That is correct. But also there is involved the amount of time that he's been a Christian, how spiritually mature he is, and that's a big question. A man could be a Christian for 50 years and never reached any degree of spiritual maturity. But you do remember that verse 6 of 1 Timothy chapter 3 says, "Not a novice." I believe the translation that was read for us, "not a new convert." So it is somebody who is spiritually mature, who has grown spiritually and been a Christian for some time, as well as an older man. I think maybe we just need to say when we talk about an older man, we're not necessarily talking about somebody in a wheelchair or somebody that's having to use a walking stick or something like that. And you know, I'm not making fun of anybody out there too, but not somebody necessarily that reached an age of 80 or whatever. I heard someone say one time the Bible doesn't know middle age. It seems it's either the younger or the older. And so by the time a man would have believing children, probably he will have reached a time, if he's been a Christian for years and spiritually mature, he'd be getting close to that particular qualification. A second thing is desire. Look at verse 1 of 1 Timothy 3. "This is a faithful saying, if a man desires the position of a bishop, he desires a good work." Let's not think, though, of one who desires as one who is seeking position. We're not talking about one who is full of selfish ambition, who would get out and almost run for office, as it were, campaign. I'm the man you need. I'm afraid of a man like that. It looks to me like anybody who really recognizes the qualifications of an elder would shrink back to some degree about serving in that position and would be a bit concerned about it. But here's a man. He recognizes the importance of the work that is to be done. He looks at the qualifications and he truly believes he's qualified. And if the church believes he's qualified, he then, seeing the importance of that work that is to be done, joyfully accepts the work and is willing to do the best he can to provide the leadership and guidance of the church that is needed. He desires the office of a bishop. but not in the sense of campaigning for him. Then there are the character qualities. And you know, when you look at the qualifications of elders, so many of these qualifications of elders fall in the realm of his character, of his behavior. For instance, look at verse 2. A bishop then must be blameless, temperate, sober-minded, of good behavior. Look at verse 3. Not given to wine, not violent, not greedy for money, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not covetous. All of those have to do with his character. Now, as was well said this morning by Al, every Christian ought to be striving to attain to this position of character. And yet it seems to me that what we have here is men who have reached maybe a level beyond the average. Somebody described it as trees out here that have been planted, and they all seem to be about the same size, except that maybe 2 or 3 or 4 just have grown a little taller. And in a congregation, we ought to have a congregation full of people who are this kind of character. But then there are some that have risen above what the ordinary is. They're excelling in the type of character. Maybe they've struggled in the past with their temper, but they have begun to control that, and the congregation recognizes that. Whatever these other qualifications are, the congregation recognizes these men have really grown in this particular area. And you may be finding the person you're looking for in an elder when you see excellent character in them. Their family qualifications. Verse 2 of 1 Timothy 3, he is the husband of one wife. Verse 4, one who rules his own house well, having his children in submission with all reverence. For if a man does not know how to rule his own house, how will he take care of the church of God? Here's a family man, and by the way he has dealt with his family, it is obvious that here's a man who knows how to take care of his family, and from that we see one who would know how to take care of the church of God. He has believing children, faithful children, depending on your translation, going back to Titus chapter 1. He has believing children, which says that he knows how to exert a moral and spiritual influence on people. Don't forget the purpose for this particular qualification. Here's a man, and he has shown the way he has handled his family, that he knows how to take care of the church of God. He knows how to rule well. He knows how to exert a moral and spiritual influence upon others. It would be easy to observe the Passover on some of the questions that rise about the family. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go ahead and talk about them and ask you to consider what I say. But before I go into some of the questions that arise, let me just say that those of us who are so anxious to please God, we have a reverence for God's word. We want to stay with it. We don't want to depart from it in any way. Those of us who are like that tend to take the hard line on nearly every subject that comes along. But the hard line is not always the right line. And I could name some subjects. For instance, are you aware that there are churches that believe that we ought not to have Bible classes? Well, somebody said, well, that sounds like the safe course. I believe we shouldn't have Bible classes. Well, then wait a minute. The hard line might be, well, don't have any Bible classes. But we have thought that through and studied that matter and decided the hard line in this case is not the right line. And in some of these areas where I'm going to be discussing the qualifications in regards to the family, I'm not going to take the hard line. I'm not going to ask you to agree to something just because I say it. I hope I've had enough influence in this church that you know I don't hold to that. But I do ask that you consider carefully the thoughts that I may give. The first question that often is asked, what is meant by children who believe or faithful children? You'll be surprised at what conclusion some people have come to in regards to that. But I have no doubt in my mind, it is simply saying that he has children who are Christians, children who are believers. And it's hard for me to see how anybody else could come to any other conclusion. Again, this shows that he knows how to exert a moral and spiritual influence on others. He has had that kind of influence on his children so that they have come to believe. Question oftentimes that is asked is one child sufficient? It says, children, can a man serve who has only one child? Well, I can take you to several passages where the word children is used, where one would be true. Go, for instance, to Genesis chapter 21. By this time, Abraham and Sarah are looking forward to a child. And in Genesis 21 verse 7, she also said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? For I have borne him a son in his old age. How many children did Sarah have? She had one. But she nursed children. Obviously, the word children would include then, in this case, would include one. Go to Matthew chapter 22. Look at verse 23. The same day, the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to him and asked him, saying, Teacher, Moses said that if a man dies having no children, his brother shall marry his wife and raise up offspring for his brother. What if a man had only one child? It says children. A man has only one child. I think all of us would recognize it would not have been necessary for the brother to take the wife and raise children because he has children, but he only had one. Would not children include one? Turn to 1 Timothy chapter 5. This one I think is especially important for us to observe. In 1 Timothy 5, the old King James says, widows indeed. The New King James says, really widows. I can't get away from widows indeed. Look at verse 3. Honor widows who are really widows. But if any widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show piety at home and repay their parents, for this is good and acceptable before God. So here's a widow, and she just had one child. He says, I don't have any responsibility to my mother because it says children. She doesn't have children. Surely all of us concede, no, if she has one child, this also would apply to him, even though children is you. And this is the very same letter in which the qualifications of elders are found. So he has children. If this widow has children who have responsibility, even though she has only one, what kind of logic would say that's true in chapter 5, but in chapter 3, it would have to be more than one? Somebody says, yes, but if he has two, he knows better how to settle disputes, but that's subjective thinking. This doesn't say anything about settling disputes. And somebody else might say, but if he has three, he would know how to handle that middle child syndrome, about the middle child. Now, before somebody thinks I'm picking on you, you may be an only child, and you may be the middle child. I'm the baby of the family. I'm the one that is spoiled rotten, But should we not take the Scriptures and let the Scriptures interpret themselves for us? And if you go to these other passages, and children would include where there might be only one, would that not be true of the qualifications of elders? Somebody says, yes, but it says, we always say that it has to be a plurality of elders. Why would it not have to be a plurality of children? Well, show me one passage where elders is used, but there's only one elder, and we'll consider that. But in the case of elders, the plurality is all the way through the Scriptures, but not in the case of children. I just ask you to think about it. Another question that's very important to people is, if a man has several children, must all of them be faithful? Well, I go back to the purpose of this qualification. What's the purpose? If a man does not know how to rule his own house, how can he take care of the church of God? Does this man have the ability to exert a moral and spiritual influence on others? Let me raise a question with you. A man has 5 children. All of them obey the gospel. All of them, when they leave home, serve the Lord. 2 sons become gospel preachers. After one of the children, 20 or 25 years later, decides, I want to go into the world. I'm tired of being a Christian. 20 or 25 years after that one has been out of the home. The fact that that one made a decision to leave the Lord, does that mean that that man therefore doesn't know how to rule his own house well? The fact that one 20 or 25 years later leaves the Lord, does that say that man does not have the ability to exert a moral and spiritual influence on a family or on the church? Think about it. Now, some judgment's got to be exercised. In fact, as you look at all these qualifications, a certain amount of judgment has to be exercised. I'll tell you my judgment in certain areas, but you'll have to think about that. Now, if a man has a child and never becomes a Christian, then that does raise a question in my mind. Or if a man has children and all of them go astray, that raises questions in my mind. Or if he has 1 or 2 and just as soon as they get out from under dad's guidance, they head right out in the world. Well, that raises some questions. But if after some child years later leaves the Lord, I raise the question, does that mean that he does not know how to rule his own house? Does that mean he does not know how to exert a moral and spiritual influence on others? Several years ago, I had occasion to meet with a group where some were taking the position that all of the children of a man had to be Christians. Well, I raised the question. Suppose that a man has several children, all of them obey the gospel, but he has one child who is not mentally capable of obeying the gospel. I thought that'd make them think a little bit. You know what their answer was? He cannot serve as an elder. When one child is not mentally capable. Well, I raise all of these things because they're questions that are on the minds of so many of us. And I'm not dodging them, as you can see. Here's a question sometimes people ask. Suppose a man's wife dies and he marries again. Can he serve as an elder? Here's a man whose wife has died. He has acted in very good judgment as he has approached some other woman, and she's a Christian, and she is a very fine lady, and they marry. Can that man serve as an elder? Well, I guess I'd just simply ask a question. I don't know any reason why he could not. He's certainly not the husband of two wives, is he? He's the husband of one wife. Again, go to 1 Timothy chapter 5, and let me compare something that's said in 1 Timothy 5 with 1 Timothy 3. Again, this has to do with a widow indeed. Look at verse 9. Do not let a widow under 60 years old be taken into the number, and not unless she has been the wife of one man. She has been the wife of one man. The American Standard Version says, having been the wife of one man. The King James Version, having been the wife of one man. The New American Standard Version, having been the wife of one man. The English Standard Version, having been the wife of one husband. Now, if the wording of 1 Timothy 3 were to say, if he has been the husband of one wife, then I think that would indicate no, he couldn't. But that's not the wording. He is the husband of one wife. Well, if he is the husband of one wife, he's the fact that he may be married a second time doesn't make him the husband of two wives. Surely all of us would agree with that. Well, going back to the qualifications, and that's a lot of time to spend on the family qualifications. Again, it'd be easy just to go right over those and not discuss them, but I hope you will consider what we have said about this. Another qualification has to do with his reputation in the community. Are you back in 1 Timothy chapter 3? Look at verse 7. Moreover, he must have a good testimony among those who are outside, lest he fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. He has a good reputation. You go out into the community and talk to people in the community, and they'll all talk about what a good person he is. Sometimes a man may not have a great reputation in the community through no fault of his own. But a man who serves as an elder is one who has a good reputation. Now, one other is of great importance, and that is his ability to teach. Look at verse 2, 1 Timothy 3. A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, temperate, sober-minded, of good behavior, hospitable, able to teach. May I suggest to you that ability to teach is far more than to stand before a class and said, yes, 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 yes. You ever sat in a class like that? The man not teaching at all. He's just having people to answer questions. And that's no, this is far more than that. In fact, if you turn to Titus chapter 1, we get a little better idea of what is involved in his being able to teach. Look at verse 9 of Titus chapter 1. He holds fast the faithful word as he has been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and convince those who contradict. What kind of a knowledge of the Bible does this man have? Well, he has the kind of knowledge in which he can discern between truth and error. He can go to the Scriptures and find from the Scriptures what the truth is. And he can help people to understand the truth. Now, he doesn't have to be a great orator. One place where I worked for a while, we had a man who was very slow of speech. Some of you would know him if I called his name. Very halting. He had a knowledge of the Bible. He could take a bunch of young men, high school age, down into the basement of that building and get them into a training kind of situation out of which several gospel preachers have come. Was he able to teach? Yes. If somebody on some particular Sunday had preached something that shouldn't have been preached, he could get up and say, I want all of you to be back next week. And I will discuss why I believe that teaching is not right. And by the next week, you could be sure he would have his material lined up and ready to present it. Is he able to teach? Yes. Is he able to convict those who contradict? Yes. But the man who just happens to teach a Bible class somewhere, but all he does is just have people answer questions. He's not teaching. He has little concept of what is really being taught. That's not a man who is qualified to serve as an elder. We're talking about a man of deep knowledge of the Scriptures. Well, do you have other qualified men to serve additionally with those who are now serving? I cannot answer that question. That's yours to decide. That's one of the nice things of being able to preach on something like this when you're not responsible for who's going to be chosen. Makes it kind of nice. But you take the Scriptures. Carefully consider. Is this man of sufficient spiritual maturity and of age? Is he the kind of man that if we ask him to serve, he'll say, well, it's a heavy responsibility. But if you believe I'm qualified, I know the importance of the work, and I'm willing to do it. Is he a man of outstanding character? Don't overlook that. Is he a man who rules his own house well and has shown by what has taken place in his family that he can exert a moral and spiritual influence on others? Is he a man who is able to teach, who can discern between truth and error and help people to see what truth is on any controversial question? And is he a man of good reputation in the community? Don't just look for somebody who is married and has children who are Christians. Look beyond that. It is so important when you're choosing men to serve as elders that you choose men who are truly qualified. Because if you choose those who are not qualified, as I talked about that church that I previously preached for when I was in college, if you do that, troubles will invariably come. Choose men who are qualified. Give careful study to it. And I will go home. I will pray for you because I care about this group of people. And I'll pray for you as you make your selections. You pray about it. And then studying the Scriptures, come to your conclusions as to the qualifications. Then look in your directory and with a view toward, is this one qualified? Is this one qualified? Is this one? so that you can make a good determination that will help this church to stay on solid ground for years to come. This morning, we extended the invitation. God's calling. He wants you. Why does He want you? Is it because you have so much to offer to the Lord? He wants you because He loves you. That's the only reason. He loves you. He gave His Son to die for you. He wants you. He wants you to be in heaven with Him. Will you come to Him? Will you come to our Lord? Submit to Him. That's what repentance is all about. Submit to Him and to His will. Confess Him. And in baptism, be buried with Him and raised with Him to life. Is someone ready to respond? We rejoice with you. Please stand and sing.